We're going to look at another piece out of the Count of Monte Cristo. This is about Dantes, Edmond Dantes, who was accused of a crime he didn't commit, and after suffering some time in prison, Dumas takes us through a chapter to which this is the introductory paragraph. And we'll get into introductory paragraphs later, but we're using it for its design as a narrative that goes through time, using details and particulars. So the topic sentence says, Dantes passed through all the stages of torture natural to prisoners in suspense. We see here that he developed the topic sentence so he could develop the subject about the stages of torture through which this prisoner is passing. So the details, the first sentence says, he was sustained at first, notice the time sequence, by that pride of conscious innocence, which is a sequence to hope. Then he began to doubt his own innocence, which justified in some measure the governor's belief in his mental alienation. And then another time sequence transition, relaxing his sentiment of pride, he addressed his supplications not to God but to man. Now the next two sentences are an amplification or an expansion of this last sentence, leaving the stages of torture and further explaining this last sentence, which is staying in one stage. God is always the last resource, and unfortunates who ought to begin with God do not have any hope in him till they have exhausted all other means of deliverance. So you can do that with any of your sentences. You can amplify them, amplify the topic of a sentence just as you are amplifying the topic sentence with sentences. We'll talk about amplification in a different series. This paragraph is also from the Count of Monte Cristo, and what you see at the bottom in the orange text makes this a transitional paragraph. But we're going to leave that particular set of sentences out and show how this is a descriptive paragraph using details. The topic sentence states, a light yacht, chaste and elegant in its form, was gliding amidst the first dews of night over the immense lake, extending from Gibraltar to the Dardanelles and from Tunis to Venice. Now in this topic sentence, we know the subject is the light yacht, and we know he's described it as chaste and elegant, so we know that he's going to further expand and bring his sentences to support that. It also says it was gliding, so it's going to talk about the gliding of that yacht. And finally, it talks about the first dews of night. So he's marked a time in which this light, chaste, and elegant yacht is gliding. So he can fairly talk about the time of day in one of his sentences, which he indeed does. So the details read, the vessel resembled a swan with its wings opened towards the wind, gliding on the water. So he's used an analogy here. Then he says, it advanced swiftly and gracefully, leaving behind it a glittering stretch of foam. He's talked about the immense lake, so he can logically talk about the foam. By degrees, the sun disappeared behind the western horizon. And this goes along with the part of the topic sentence that talks about the first dews of night. Now it says, by degrees the sun disappeared behind the western horizon. So now we know it's completely dark. And then he goes on to amplify that, saying, but as though to prove the truth of the fanciful ideas in heathen mythology, its indiscreet rays reappeared on the summit of every wave, as if the god of fire had just sunk upon the bosom of Amphitrite, who in vain endeavored to hide her lover beneath her azure mantle. The yacht moved rapidly on, though there did not appear to be sufficient wind to ruffle the curls on the head of a young girl. Now the last two sentences that we mentioned are transitional sentences, talking about a man standing on the prow. Let's go on to the last example. This is a piece from The Amateur Immigrant by Stevenson. He's talking about an island in the topic sentence, the isle, the undiscovered, the scarce believed in, now lay before them and close aboard. And Herrick thought that never in his dreams had he beheld anything more strange and delicate. So we know that they're going to talk about the island, and they're going to talk about Herrick's vision and what he's seeing in this strange and delicate island. The particulars say the beach was excellently white, talks about the continuous barrier of trees, the land, and more about the trees. It describes what they see as the schooner coasts northward, and then it moves on to talk about analogies. He tortured himself to find analogies. This will further paint a descriptive picture to the reader using familiar things, a common strategy used in good writing. The isle was like the rim of a great vessel sunken in the waters. It was like the embankment of an annular railway grown up on with wood, so slender it seemed amidst the outrageous breakers, so frail and pretty, he would scarce have wondered to see it sink and disappear without a sound, and the waves close smoothly over its descent. So we've looked at, in our videos on details in particular paragraphs, descriptive and narrative paragraphs to which this form is applied.